Next In.
Welcome to Next In. I am by myself. I don't have Shane co-hosting with me, well, because way more fun when he's not here. So I am joined. I'm really, really honored to be joined. We have senior principal game designer from Blizzard, a small little studio. May or may not have heard of Blizzard. And so I got Rob Gallerani. I said it right.
You said it perfect.
Okay. I'll make sure I'm saying it right.
First hurdle done.
Gallerani from Blizzard, like I said, senior game designer. So, and has had a over 20-year career in the gaming space, doing a lot of different stuff at some awesome studios. So thank you so much, Rob, for joining us.
Anytime.
So, I again, we like to do these to showcase talent, obviously, but also in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people will tune in. Of the 50 or 60 million people who watch this, a lot of them will do it because they're like, wow, I'd love to get into gaming, or I want to get into product, or whatever it is. And so being able to have someone who's had such an awesome career and at some of the biggest well-known studios kind of gives us a chance to at least hear how you got there first, so some people can kind of identify ways that you got to where you're at that maybe they could mimic. So tell us a little bit about your career path.
Yeah, so going back to the late 90s, I was originally looking to get into architecture because architecture cool, right? And I had a class at high school that did regular, like actual drafting, like with paper and your special little arm on your desk. But they also had AutoCAD, which was essentially architecture in the computer. And I had played around with a bunch of other stuff in the computer. But this was kind of like the boring, everything has to be, machinist perfect to make this sort of thing. And at some point, I found out that you could animate in CAD. And CAD actually evolved to be Studio Max and actually be like a program that, people use in the industry, not just architecture. But that was kind of like where I got the itch. And we had a group at my high school called the Learning Web, which kind of set up apprenticeships. And so I was like, hey, I'd love to get into computer animation. And they were like, you're in upstate New York. Like, we like, this isn't even a thing. What are you talking about? And I was like, well, just look. And so they actually found a company called Art Bear Pigmation, which was a hilarious title. But I'm not going to guess how old you are, but you might remember a TV show called Reading Rainbow.
I know I look like I'm 42. I'm actually 26, but I'm 42, and yes, I do remember Reading Rainbow. It was early stages of my life, but I do remember it. Yes.
Well, good. We're totally the same age, 27. So the animation in the beginning of like the astronaut and the butterfly and everything like that was done by this studio. And they were in Ithaca, New York, which was around where I was growing up. And so I got an apprenticeship there, and they did everything old school, right? Like actually like drawing on acetate frames. It was actually like a husband and wife couple where he would do the inking and she would do like the painting. And the way you do old school animation is you basically paint backwards, right? So if like, someone had a flower shirt, you would paint the center of the flower first, then the petals, then the background, because you're flipping it over. So I learned a bunch of bonkers skills, but he wanted to get into computer animation. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll figure out computer animation and you teach me the 2D stuff. And so kind of together we figured some stuff out. So I actually got to animate the number 13 in Sesame Street. Like this alien falls to sleep and he counts spaceships to get to sleep. And so I got to model these spaceships. And looking back, they were horrible, but it was kind of a start. And so I ended up going to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, and I actually had like slides. But I will forever give my mother a hard time. And I know, because I have two daughters and they are going to do the same thing to me. But you end at the end of high school and my mom's like, you have to apply to this college and this college. You should have like 900 colleges you want to go to. I'm like, yeah, but I only really want to go to this one. I'll just apply to this one and get in. And she's like, no, that's not how it works. You have to apply to everywhere. And I was like, I guess. And so like begrudgingly as a stupid teenager, like I think I filled out like 3 or 4. But sure enough, the one I wanted, I got into, and I even I'm like, why did you make me apply to all these other ones? I just what I wanted. So advice to everyone, listen to your mother. Fill out
Yes.
a whole bunch of forms. So I got into the Arts of Pittsburgh, and they were actually pretty cool in that they also, before you touched a computer, you had to do all the 2D stuff, right? But pretty much when I was done with there, I didn't even know what I was going to get into, whether I was going to go into video games, whether I was going to go into commercials, whether I was going to go into movie special effects. Like I basically had the generic 3D artist degree. And back then you would make your demo reel and you would put it on a VHS tape, and I would mail out VHS tapes to all these studios. And my recruiter called me and they said, hey, have you ever heard of a company called Vicarious Visions? And I'm like, I've never heard of a company called Vicarious Visions. And I looked them up, and it's like, we made Blue's Clues. And I'm like, okay, great, whatever. I'm like, whatever, beggars can't be choosers. I'm like, why did you ask? And they're like, it's like 2 hours away from you. It's in Albany, New York. It was actually, they said it was in Troy, New York. And I'm like, I've been to Troy, New York. There's not a lot in Troy, New York. How is there a video game company in Troy, New York? And they're like, look, it's 2 hours away. I'm like, well, I just got to school. Sure, I'll check it out. So I like hop in my station wagon and I go over, and one of the guys, Andy Lomerson, who still works with me to this day, he was working on, I walk in and there's a pizza box with a bunch of circuit boards and a Super Nintendo controller like soldered to it and some circuit boards. And he's like, hey, this is the new Game Boy Advance. And I'm like, what? And they had just gotten the dev kit from Nintendo for the Game Boy Advance, which I don't even know about even existing, but it was basically a Super Nintendo in your pocket. And they're like, yeah, we're making Tony Hawk for the Game Boy Advance. And at this time, Tony Hawk was like, freaking amazing. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I am sold hook, line, and sinker. So I was lucky enough for them to hire me. I think I was like employee number like 27. And I got to make a bunch of Tony Hawks. Tons of games actually used that engine we made. I actually made like Jet Grind Radio for the Game Boy Advance. If anyone remembers Jet Grind Radio, we made Disney Skates. But VV was like a small independent studio. And so we worked for DreamWorks. We worked for, EA. We worked for, Activision, everybody. And after doing that for a while, we had a contract with Activision where it was like a 9-title deal. And they were mostly Tony Hawk games. And that contract was like nearing an end. And we were like, oh, we just should re-up our contract, right? And they were like, no, we think we'll just buy you. You guys are really good. And we're like, oh, okay. And so VV got acquired by Activision at that point. I think this was like in 2006 or something like that. And at this point, actually, I think a little earlier than that, or before, I forget, all blurs. I had been like generic artist, even though I was an animator. Like we were so tiny, it was like you're either an artist or an engineer. We didn't even hire designers. You would like just take the role of designer. So I'd already been like a designer on a bunch of projects. But I remember I worked on a licensed property, and those are not to be mean, they're the worst games to work on, because really the people you work through are the same people who do the lunchbox and the backpack and the Halloween costume.
Yeah.
Okay. And so all it's just, you're just another product with their brand on it. And so we're making Spider-Man 3, which I won't poo-poo it too bad, but I'll totally poo-poo it. And I really, at this point, had loved the combat side of characters, right? Like how characters move. And an animator and your handling designer have to work really close together. If they don't, your game normally doesn't feel right. But at that point, I was like, look, I actually really want to switch to design. And so as of like, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago now, I switched formally to design. And from that point on, I just kind of stayed design throughout the rest of till today, right? And so the cool thing about VV, and when we got acquired by Activision, is the way that Activision publishing, and to be clear, like Activision is obviously the news all the time for many different reasons that we won't get into.
Yeah, we'll stay away from certain topics. All right, good.
There's Activision ATVI, like the publicly traded company, and that sits at the very, very top. And under their umbrella, there's Activision Publishing, there's Blizzard Publishing, there's King. And so we were under the Activision Publishing side. And the way that Activision Publishing runs is they let all the studios still be themselves. So all of your studio culture, everything like that, like if you go talk to Toys for Bob or Beanox or Sledgehammer or Infinity Ward, they are very, very different. They have their own cultures, their own groups. Same with VV. So VV was still VV, and we were just under Activision, right? We just had Uncle Bobby pay the paycheck, right? So, but by being associated with Activision, most all of my titles were Tony Hawk's, Guitar Heroes, Skylanders, and so because we had all of those properties, and then I think the one big quick twist we got was we started working with Bungie. So Bungie was still Bungie. Activision never acquired Bungie, but they basically became a publisher for Bungie. So they had a more old school relationship with them. And so Bungie was looking to obviously make a lot more content. They were coming out with Destiny 2, and we got pulled on to do Warmind. And so Warmind was the second expansion after Destiny 2 came out, because I think Curse of Osiris came out before us, or Trials of Osiris. I forget which one of those. And so that was kind of a really cool, like, first foray into an MMO shared world shooter. I mean, they don't like to call themselves an MMO, but you know what Destiny.
Well, it's got the negative connotations. That
yeah. Well, that's the other, like, after, like, so another piece of advice is, like, there's so much baggage around so many terms nowadays, right? Like, when you say MMO, so many things mean so many different things, and it's like, it just stands for massively multiplayer online, which is pretty much every game ever.
Yeah, I mean, isn't Madden an MMO to some extent? Like, I mean, it really is. Although I know the MMO title is not seen with a lot of positive vibes from people, because they've seen enough fail that they're just.
Yeah.
But what they, like, to your point, that what they don't realize is there's a lot of ones that have been successful, maybe just not termed MMO.
Yeah, that's the trick. Just if you don't call it an MMO and it does well, then
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so I shipped a couple Destiny titles. We did Warmind, we did Black Armory, and then I started working on Diablo 2 Remastered, which was the last title I shipped. So and during the time of us doing Diablo 2 Remastered, that's when we kind of shifted BV from under the Activision publishing branch to under the Blizzard publishing.
Blizzard, yeah. So you're all right. So you're a game designer, right?
Yep.
What does that mean? Tell people, like, what does that? So you design games, yeah, clearly. But what does that mean that you really truly kind of day to day, month to month? What is under your scope that you have to make sure you're responsible for?
So the term designer is ridiculously generic. You're absolutely right. Like, you could look up, I could like go apply for a job. I'm like, I want to be a designer. And it's like, oh, do you want to pick out wallpaper, or do you want to, like, it's like, no, like, and so the other thing I think that's important to work on or notice is that the industry has just grown so huge, and projects have become so massive. And so back in the day, if I was a designer on a project, I might be one of two designers, and we would split roles, and you would be a level designer. You do the handling, you do the UI, you do all the systems work. I like to tell people it's the rules of the game, right? Like, you make up the rules of the game. But it's so much more than that. It's the whole experience, right? Now that games have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people working on them, you have any number of specialists, right? And so depending on what kind of designer you are, has a huge impact on your day-to-day. So if you are a level designer, you tend to be building worlds, building spaces, you're moving the environment around, and level designer only applies to certain games, right? Like, I remember we had a whole bunch of level designers who had to change what they did when we started making Guitar Hero, because a level in Guitar Hero is not like a platformer with platforms you jump to. It's a note track, right?
Yeah.
And then you have UX designers. Those are people who are like, oh, when you get to the screen, can you tell what to do? Right? Like, is this button obvious? Is this right? Like, because sometimes the rules of the game are great, but they're not very well communicated to the player. And obviously, the game designer doesn't come shipped with the game, so you have to just kind of figure it out, right? Like, nobody reads anything. Everyone button mashes, and you should still be able to figure out how to play the game from that point. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I'm putting together chairs. I don't want to look at directions. I want to be able to figure it out.
And so really, I think more what I do nowadays is more of a design director, and where you're essentially kind of rallying a large group of people around an idea. Because the days of one person having this perfect idea and then them getting to see it really only exists in the independent space at this point. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're self-published and you're a tiny studio, well, good on you. You are awesome. I wish I could be you, but it's all on you. It's like your vision, this one vision holder, that everything. there are downsides to that too, though, right? Like you get all this creative freedom, but if I were to bring on a team of 5 designers and I'm like, here's the entire design, just go implement it. Well, they don't have any ownership, right? Like they're not getting to be creative and invested in anything like that. So you want to kind of set a North Star, but then let people work in it, right? So I would be like, okay, you're a level designer. All right, we got this one character. They can turn into a tank. And we really need this level to introduce them to how their tank treads work. Oh, and by the way, it's totally a Victorian setting English person game of steampunk tanks. Like you kind of give them a box and then they're like, oh yeah, we can do that. And you're kind of coming in giving feedback. So it's a lot more of a directing. And then you play that middleman, right, between the devs and all your stakeholders, right? Because your stakeholders are obviously first and foremost your players, right? Like who you making this for. And they're not present at the table when you make the game. And then they have an awful lot to say after the game is made. And then you have obviously like your publishers. And then there's people's careers, right? Like, so you might have someone on your team who really wants to get into some type of work or some type of profession, or they want a leadership role. So you're kind of balancing a lot of those plates. And it's not just about the game at that point. It's about your team being excited about your game. Because like good ideas are a dime a dozen, but the right idea for like what you're trying to make and the people, that's where it gets tricky, right? Like,
so you mentioned the players and you get feedback in terms of reviews. What's your worst review, like that you were a big part of, you were excited, you built, you put it out, and then the feedback was less than something that you were ecstatic about? You were like, oh, I thought this was better than everyone else.
So, okay, well, I'll give you 2 answers. One, very broad, is feedback that is so like I can't act upon, right? Like when the feedback is just like, well, this is crap, or this is the worst game ever. It's like, well, can you tell me why? Right? Like when they're just like, oh, you're horrible and you're horrible at your job. Like that's actually kind of easy to ignore because it's like, I don't know what you wanted, right?
Yeah.
I think the tricky part is probably the worst one was we had made a game, and it was actually really well reviewed and everything like that. And it was a Kung Fu Panda game, and we made it for the DS. Now, the DS, for those who don't know, was a Nintendo portable that had a touch screen on it, right? And it came with a stylus. And when we started the game, the vision of the game, not just from us, but from Nintendo, from everyone, was like, use what that device can do. Make it touchscreen. So we had to design a combat system because it was basically a Metroidvania game, right? Like it was kind of like a side scroller. You'd be Poe, and you could unlock all the different moves, just like Samus unlocks the Varia suit and the torpedoes. Like Poe would unlock the ability to turn into a ball in crane form, and it was totally Metroidvania. But it all was driven by the touchscreen, right? Like slashes, taps, circles. That's pretty much how you interact with the game. And the whole vision was you could play the whole game with the touchscreen. And I feel we actually delivered really, really awesome on it. But one of the first reviews we got was about someone who just hated the fact that they couldn't use buttons. And there was a way to use buttons, but it wasn't the best way, right? Because that's not how we built the game. We built the game to be using the touchscreen. And they pretty much just lambasted the whole game because they're like, stupid that you have to use the touchscreen. And I'm like, you bought it on a DS, right? Like that's kind of its shtick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like saying like, oh, I bought this great VR game, but you have to wear this stupid helmet all the time. It's like, I don't know what to do with that. And I think that's the most frustrating when it's like, hey, like clearly this game wasn't for you, but you hate it, right? And it's like, oh, right.
Yeah. So it's like buying Forza and being like, why do I have to drive a car?
Yeah, exactly. Or even anytime you see those reviewers where they're like, I don't normally play sports games, but... And it's like, well, then why did your boss assign you to review this game? Like,
why are you reviewing Madden 22? So I see a lot of, obviously, tabletop games behind you. Am I seeing this correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's because you're older than the age of, 15. And so therefore you learned. Was that a part of kind of getting yourself into the gaming space? Got a lot of the new people getting into gaming. They're like, yeah, I loved playing games on my phone or on, a PC or whatever. But when I talk to more industry vets, you do hear a lot of people who were like, whether it was D&D or they were really heavily involved in gaming from a 2D standpoint, or tabletop standpoint. And that's what got him into this idea of entertainment that you're involved in versus, watching a movie or whatever. And so they really enjoyed playing a tabletop game, Clue or whatever it was. And that's what got their brains constantly swirling, so that when gaming did get introduced, or at least started to become popularized with, I guess, Atari, but really Nintendo, and, moved on, that they were like, I want to get into this industry. Is that where you have this love from the games behind you? Or
Well, I mean, I think I love games of all kind. Like, to totally be transparent, like, I could put LARPing on my resume of things I've done because I like gaming so much. That's how deep the nerd hole goes.
okay,
But one of the beauties of board games, other than it's something I can do with my friends around a table, right, is with modern games, right? Like, I could spend weeks sitting at my computer tuning something, everything. When I shut my computer off, it's all gone, right? Like, it's all virtual. And here it's tangible. And on top of it, I can test a mechanic with a notepad and a marker and some dice. I don't need anyone else other than the people testing out the game. Whereas if I want to prototype something in a modern game, like, it's like, oh, okay, we have this idea for a new character and we want to give him this ability. Some people, even at the development side, can kind of imagine. It's like, okay, look, we have a stick figure, and when he shoots this sphere, pretend it's a lightning bolt, and when the sphere blips away to a red dot, it explodes. Like, just pretend that. But even in the developer side, like, that's very few and far between, especially if it comes to, like, you're trying to get like a giant team of people. They're going to be like, well, wait, does it have to be a ball? It's like, no, it's a lightning bolt, pretend. And so it becomes a process to get something in, to test it, to see if it feels fun or not. And you could waste days of someone's time, maybe even weeks of something before you fail, right? Like, I love failing fast. With a deck of cards and some dice, I will know in 5 minutes if something is fun or not, right? And it's just, and so pretty much behind me, like, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different mechanics, right? So, like, I'll just grab one. There's a game, and I'm not going to pronounce it right. Let me show you guys. Is called Sushimzak Ilgakuwak. Yes, that's the face you're supposed to look when you hear that noise.
Okay. You might have said it closer than I ever would have gotten it.
But the weird thing of the game, it's just a dice rolling game, kind of a pressure luck. And depending on what you roll, you can either acquire a good piece of sushi, right? Or you can get a bad piece of sushi.
Which has salmonella. It's got salmonella.
Yep. And so, like, to win the game, you just have a stack of negative and a stack of positive. And for every positive you get, you have to have a corresponding negative. If you have more negatives, well, that's fine. But if you have more positives, those don't count because you have to have basically balance out. And that concept of, like, okay, we're going to have a mechanic where you basically have to have your vegetables with your dessert. Like, it applies everywhere, right? Like, we could come up with, okay, we're going to make some type of sword in the game that gives you triple crit, but your character has 0 strength, right? Like, and it's like,
yeah,
how do you communicate that to the players? And you'll see trends where people are like, okay, there's now fighting for the least negative, and, like, those are all things that you can test really quickly. And the fact that
with bad sushi.
Yeah, with bad sushi, right?
We've all tested bad sushi, so
I still don't get why I need to eat so many pieces of bad sushi to get equal sushi, but
but you do. Go to Chef Lynn's sushi buffet. I'm sure it's not good. It's in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. And so you're obviously, being in the position you're at, kind of the level you're at, you do a lot of interviews, right? You're bringing on people over at Blizzard. What is something that you're seeing? Because, again, next level, it's our day job here. We do recruiting, very boutique firm, a lot of gaming clients. So we are, hopefully our audience is people trying to get into the space. move up, maybe people who want to go work at Blizzard and so on. What are you seeing as a typical mistake people are making, anywhere from how to get in, like how to get noticed, to what they're doing in interviews, etc.?
Yeah, there's definitely a handful. So one thing I think that is a double-edged sword is how much of a diehard fan you are of the games that the company you're applying to makes, right? Because I think something that a lot of people fail to see is that when you're making the game, right, when you know how the sausage is made, you can change the recipe 100%, right? Like if you said, "Hey, I really want to go work on, I want to go work on World of Warcraft, but you know what? I don't think there should be mana. I think it should all be everything costs nothing," right? Like, I'm not saying that's a good idea. In fact, it's probably a bad idea. But a lot of people feel that they have to stay in the rules of the game that's already been shipped, right? So they come and they get very excited, but then they're like, "Oh, well, you could just do more of this," or, "Hey, I remember when you guys released this content 2 years ago. What if you bring that back?" And there's there's this like trap to be like, "Here's an idea you guys already had, and I changed it a little bit because this one thing about it bugged me, so I made it better." And it's like, don't get me wrong, that's fine, but the ability to see the matrix can be like, no, like if you want to totally break a system or reinvent the system or turn the systems on its head, like that's what we want. That's someone who's making the game. You're not just a fan of the game churning out the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then I think the other mistake a lot of people do, and it's not necessarily something that will show a bunch in the interview, but it's very apparent almost always everyone's first project is, if you want to get into the industry and you've just started, 9 times out of 10, you have an idea for a game in your head and you love it and it's the best idea and it's super precious and you can't wait to get in the industry for you to make your game. And I think the reality of the situation is someone's probably already made your game and your game can be a lot better than you think it is. And in fact, you're way too close to your game and you're way too attached to your game. Now, once again, if you want to get into the independent thing where you just basically crowdfund your own game, you do good on you. Like, make that game, make your favorite game. But you also run into this George Lucas effect where it's like, okay, it's only this one person's vision. Feedback is really, really good because you also have to realize you're working with a team. Stuff changes, right? Like you could be working on something for 6 months and then it's like, oh, the funding changed, or uh-oh, this other game just came out that uses the same thing and it actually was really badly received. We need to change something. Or someone just, we just got a bunch of people, hired in. They now have this new skill set. Can you use it, right? Like making games is a living thing, especially the longer you go, right? Like how many times have we heard of a game where they started making it for one system and then a better system came out and they changed what came out for? So like flexibility is huge. And so when you get attached to an idea, which is only natural, everyone does it, it becomes dangerous. You can very like tunnel focused. And I think loving the process, like the process of, hey, I came up with a game pitch and you send it to the 3 stakeholders or 4 stakeholders, right? And you're like, I got this great idea for a game. And you have to talk to the artist, right? The lead artist and the lead artist, like, we actually can't make that content that you're proposing. Like, you can't come back and be like, well, learn. Like, I mean, sometimes you can, but it's really more like, okay, give me another day. I'm going to go scrap this idea and come up with a new one. And like, to love the process of starting over again with a new idea, with a new set of restrictions. Like if you love that, you'll be fine.
So be adaptable. And I think it's great. It's like when we talk to people in gaming, we ask them, what's your favorite games? What do you like to play? And so on. It's always exciting when they like our studio's game. But to your point, we want them to say like, I'm guessing you like people who are very into gaming. Like you're into tabletop games. It's that concept of, I like creating rules for a game. I like entertainment. I like the mechanics of it. I don't necessarily only like Diablo, and I have the tattoo on my shoulder to prove it. Like that's probably too much, and it keeps you inside the box too much. And you're like, well, that's awesome. Then you could be our community manager. But otherwise, like when it comes to being a dev or design, maybe you need someone who thinks a little bit more adaptable and can kind of think of, well, rules can change in the game, or like you said, certain artists can't make certain things. And so you've got to be able to kind of work within the new game, think outside the box, etc.
Yeah, it's where the reality of we actually need to build this kind of deal. And there's only so many people and so many tools in a day, right? And every idea will have to go through some iteration to actually see the light of day.
So what is your advice to someone who's like, maybe they're in the gaming space, they're a couple years in, and they're going, gosh, I'd love to get to where Rob's at. So I've gotten in, I've broken in, maybe it's at an indie studio, or it's at a 343, or who knows, right? So they're in, but they're like, I want to get to where Rob's at. I want to be someone who's really influential in the gaming space, not just I have a job in the industry. So what's your advice to that? Because there's more to it than just, can you get your foot in the door? Can you be a QA over at some company? How do they get to where you're at, where it's, I actually can have some influence in something pretty special?
So, good question. I guess the first thing is communication is super important, right? Like if you go in as a designer, you can't just talk design to other designers, right? Like you need to learn to talk to a VFX artist. You need to talk to the artist. You need to take their feedback and other things like that. Like I've seen people or studios where they're like, it's like, oh, well, I'm a designer. I have animation feedback. Oh, well, you're not an animator, so why are you giving that feedback? I'm like, our players aren't animators, right? Like we all should be advocates for the player. And like a classic example is like, you're always going to go to a designer and it's like, how many frames from when a player pushes a button to when I get my character in the air should there be in the animation, right? And an animator who's fresh out of school will be like, there's squash and stretch and there's anticipation and the character has to crouch down. And if you ever play that game, it plays like fudge. It's just like, nope, you should be in the air frame one. Like that's, unless you're making a Last of Us style game where everything is kind of paced out that way. It's like, no, it needs to be instant. And the animator needs to respect that's the goal, is making it feel good. But the designer also has to understand that like, that's not how animators are trained. And you need to communicate. So communication is the key. If you can talk to different disciplines, if you can get everyone on the same side for the player, and it sounds easy. It's like, of course we're all on the same side. It's like, sometimes you're not, right? Like you're like, someone's like, I have this grand vision of how this art is supposed to look. And it's like, you just made all the things that heal you bright red and all the things that hurt you cool blue. No one is going to understand that, right? Like, and so communication, respect of other disciplines is really big. And then I think the other thing that is a huge pain point for everyone once they reach a certain point, and it's a total buzzword, and I apologize for saying this phrase, but there's a saying that says, what got you here won't get you there. And essentially what it means is you're going to start the industry and you're going to be really good at doing your thing, right? Maybe you're really awesome at making balanced systems, or you're really awesome at animating things. You're going to do that for a couple of years and you're going to be awesome and you're going to be great and you're going to get more and more work. But at a certain point, if you want to get to be a leader, if you want to get to be an influencer, you need to learn, like, you need to stop making and you need to start empowering people around you to make better. And that's a really, really hard thing, because up until that point in your career, you've only been evaluated by how good you do thing. And when
that's where your ego comes from too.
Oh.
And that's really tough. And I know, again, most of my more recent career has been in leadership, but when you're in sales or recruiting in our space, your ego comes from making the place, from winning, getting the win, or making the sale, or in your case, balancing, or whatever it is that you do, making the designing the gun, right? That's and you're the best at it and people praise you for it. So your ego comes from it. So giving that to someone else and allowing them to do it, and everyone's praising and cheering them, and you're standing behind them, you're like, well, what about me? And so sometimes it's very hard from an ego standpoint to let go and let someone else get the praise.
It's not just hard. It's like terrifying, because I think that, at least how I always thought it, like you reach a point where, and they call it imposter syndrome and everything, where you're like, no one's going to like, and I've even heard people who are like, what does that leadership do? He hasn't checked anything into the game. Like, he's not making any content. And you're right. Like, you're just like, I haven't checked in or edited a data file in years. I deal in Confluence and PowerPoint and getting people wrangled onto a team. And you'll read, like, it's like a crisis where you're like, do I even add anything to the game, right? But leaders who try to take credit for, like, that's just cliche. Like, everyone knows it's a bad thing, but it's very, very hard to actually experience it and realize, because when you do it right, you do get the praise. You will get the praise. And people are like, oh my goodness, you brought this all together, you hold the vision. But it's being praised for something you've never done before. And it's trusting that your team will come through, right? Because that's the other thing. It's not just people trusting you, it's you trusting your team.
Well, your sphere of influence has grown. And as I've worked on developing leaders and leaders who lead other leaders and so on, and it's one of those, it's very tough. Your sphere of influence has grown much, much larger. And so your results are, you are in control of them, just very indirectly.
Yeah.
Right. And that is for someone, I'm a control freak. And so this idea that I can't control it, but I have to let this person that I taught or empowered, and they empowered someone and their team built it. It's like, whoa, I'm 5 steps away from the person who just picks up the phone or whatever.
It's even delayed gratification too, right? Like you make an awesome animation, you make a great design spec. It's right there. You finished it. It's done. Heck, you check it in. It's now in the whole game. But it's like, oh no, I want this team to be like high morale, really invested. Like, it's not like you have one speech and now everyone's on board, right? Like, it takes time. So yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it go really bad where people become leaders and they take on all the responsibility of leadership, but keep doing the other thing. And they don't let go because they're like, it's like one of those, like, no, only I can do it. And it's like, you burn yourself out, right? Like, I've seen people leave the industry after like bouts like that. And it's like I when I taught both my daughters how to tie their shoe, it's that moment where it's like, okay, we got to get out the door. We got 1 minute to get out the door. And they're like, oh, I didn't tie my shoes. And it's like, do I just say, here, move, I'm going to tie your shoes for you? Or do you say, okay, you can do this. You can tie your shoe.
Or you're walking out with shoes untied. Sorry, sweetheart.
Like,
yeah, I got 5 kids. I don't have time to tie all 5 of them. So figure it out, guys.
So, okay, quick question, total tangent. Do you do bunny ears or do you around the tree?
Quick answer. I don't know. I let my kids figured it out at some point. I don't know if my wife taught them or their teacher taught them. So I couldn't really tell you how my kids do it. I do around the tree personally. My kids do the bunny ears. I'm assuming they learned that from my wife, and bothers the crap out of me because their shoes are always so loose when they tie them.
Okay, I'm not alone.
Tie them tight.
You're not alone. I am my wife. So my oldest I taught around the tree. My youngest, my wife taught bunny ears, and I'm like, it's past the point. I'm like, well, nope. For the rest of your life, you're just a bunny ear. So,
you will have shoes that don't tighten, and So the bottom line from this podcast that we have learned is the dads are typically right, the moms are typically wrong, but we work together and we've all survived. Right? Is that what I gathered from Rob? I would never say that.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm not going to take credit for that one.
Okay. No, my wife has taught, I take far less credit in the rearing of my children who do all 5 know how to, well, I don't know if I have twin 7-year-olds. I think they know how to tie their shoes. I'm not sure. But I'm with you that there's this, and again, to me, this is my favorite discussion I've had is like it's fun to talk gaming. It's more fun to even really, for me personally, is to talk about the leadership in there. And like, you make an awesome game, whether it's Spider-Man or Diablo or whatever game it is, there are a lot of people that have to empower their teams to do it. And that is the buzzword. Oh, you're empowering. Does that mean you're lazy? No, it means you create an environment where each person gets to operate at their peak, where they're absolutely fulfilled, motivated, and skilled. And you make sure to put those pieces in the right place and create that culture where they can do it. And yes, it is a lot of delayed gratification for people who want to get to your spot. You got to check your ego at the door and let other people get some praise, and it'll come back to you.
Yeah, I think the one good, well, it's harder, but it's good, is different people on your team are also good at different phases. Right. So you're going to get people who love pre-production where it's blue sky. Wouldn't it be cool if, right? Like every sentence starts with, wouldn't it be cool if? And there are people that are really, really uncomfortable with that. because like anytime you've ever pitched a big idea, you're going to get 10 people who are like, well, what's the answer to this? And this, like, well, I don't know. We just came up with it yesterday. I'm not going to know what color his shoelace is. Right. And then you have other people who are like, no, I want to be in production. They're like, give me my list of tasks and I'm just going to fill them out. And then there's the close where it's like, okay, look, we know you really love this and this. We don't have time to finish this. You got to walk away. And some people love that. They're the people who like to cross everything off their grocery list. But there are other people it's physically uncomfortable for them to like be like, no, I have to walk away. And just learning your team and learning which of them are good in which zones and where they need to work on, like that's where I get a ton of satisfaction, is just like but a lot of it just comes from doing it enough, right? There's going to be that mistake that everyone makes in their first game, right? Of like not letting go or whatever it is. By the time you hit like your 10th game, 12th game, you're kind of like, okay, I'm calloused to this. I've done this before, right?
And so how can we help you? Are you hiring people on your team? Are you like, for the people listening, how can they get in touch with you to, what is it that you can, kind of selfishly steal from taking on this podcast of like, I'm looking for people who want to get into this design or level design, and I'm looking for a senior level designer. I don't know.
Yeah. So, the generic plug is you can literally go to blizzard.com and there is just pages of openings. Please apply if you're passionate about their games, if you're passionate about making, it doesn't even have to be passionate about Blizzard games. Like, in fact, if you're passionate about other types of games, that's a diverse perspective, right? Like, obviously, like inclusion and diversity is a really big buzzword, and we tend to go to, how people look or how people, associate. But it's also just where your interests are, what you're thinking about, what's fun for you. And that other perspective is like a huge, huge boon. Like I remember there was one game we're working on where, one of the designers just had this roundabout where they absolutely love dating sims. And we're like, okay, we're making a Tony Hawk game. I don't know if we need a dating sim in here. But once again, going back to abstracting, just like we can with any of these board games, like it was essentially you're talking about a reputation meter that grows with different individuals in the game, right? And it's like, oh, okay, I totally get why you do that, because you learn something about this part of the game, and by doing certain actions, you would get rewarded for doing that. That's all really a dating sim is. They've just added some fun narrative depending on which flavor of dating sim you want to play. In fact, we always joke we want to do a monster mecha dating sim where it's like Godzilla and other mechs, and then we're like, that would play that game. But yeah, and then if you have like other questions, like I'm on LinkedIn, like I think you guys will attach a LinkedIn thing for me. Like reach out, just ask a question. Like the worst thing I do is I'm slow to respond to you. But yeah,
I think that's awesome. I appreciate, again, if I were like in the gaming space and I had the opportunity to just connect with someone in a very influential role at a studio as big as Blizzard, I just think that's awesome. We work with the high schools in the area that have just launched their entrepreneurship and innovation center, and they are actually building a game design capstone project for seniors and stuff that they can do and build these games. And we met some of these kids, and they're awesome. Like, for them to be able to just reach out to you, connect on LinkedIn, stuff like that, I just think that's how the industry grows, right? Is people like you who aren't stuffy and like, don't talk to me, you're too young, kid, but instead encourages them, because mentors in this space, every person we've talked to typically looks back at their mentors, just like you did, even that first initial, when you're sitting there, doing the original 2D animation, that's what got you going. And so I think that's important.
Well, I think it goes without saying that this industry, there's a lot of jaded people, myself included. It's very easy to get bitter and crusty and everything like that. And because you get really close to it, right? You're dealing with the realities of deadlines and these types of things. But every time I go or speak at like a GDC or a college or judge a game jam, like I'm reminded that like what I get to do is like someone's dream, right?
Yes.
Like they're just, and that passion is infectious. And it's totally like I can't be bummed at work the next day knowing that there are classes, an entire generation of people that would do anything to get. I'm like, how selfish would I be to be like, oh, whatever, I guess I'm just that cool. Like, no, like it's so exciting and invigorating to get to do those things. And
It
even
probably reminds
it does.
you of your 20-year-old self, your 18-year-old self. That probably would, if I had told you at 18, hey, I'm going to let you be super influential game design, almost design director for arguably, I don't know, you would know better than me, top 5 biggest, most influential gaming studios in the world, you would go, yeah, I'll do it for free.
Yeah.
So right now, just so Blizzard is listening, Rob has said he is going to volunteer the rest of his career. He said he would do it for free at 18. He will still. No, probably not. So, but it's that idea that when you hear kids, and see people, young people who are trying to get in the industry, it reminds you like, yeah, you know what? I did have that game that was really frustrating, or that team or that person I had to deal with, or that meeting that sucked, or whatever. It's like, yeah, but I get to design some of the coolest games in the world. I get to be a part of that process. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it. I think the biggest thing is like I said, I've worked on too many games at this point. Some of them I absolutely love. They were my favorite games to work on. Some of them were not my favorite, right? But if you love the people, if you love the team, and if you love the process, it doesn't matter what the game's going to be, right? It doesn't matter because you're creating a unique experience for a group of people, right? Like games do something that nothing else can do, right? Like it's a way to connect with another individual more than a book, more than a movie, right? It's actually interactive. And I think that's why people get so passionate about it if something doesn't click exactly right. But
it's like fantasy football for sports fans, right?
Yeah.
So you can watch a game, you can watch a movie, but here you're interacting with people while you're a part of the movie, or in this case, it's a game.
The number of times I've had to debate with like fantasy football players, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of geeking out about what gear my D&D character has. I don't spend 7 hours a day and they're like, well, you're just a nerd gamer. I'm like, you are the same thing.
You're just a nerd sports guy.
You're just a nerd sports fan.
No different.
And that's totally cool. So,
all right, last two questions, and you now said it, so you have to answer this one. What's your favorite game you have built? You said you have games you're not so thrilled with, some that are your favorites. What's your favorite? Only one.
Favorite game that I've built.
Then I'll ask you who your favorite daughter is. Then we will get into our last. I'm just kidding.
Depends on the day for that one.
Yeah.
Favorite game I've built. So, okay, I'll have to pick one. All right, so and this was a game within a game. I'm going to be super specific. I'm going to milk this answer. In Warmind for Destiny 2, the game itself was not my favorite game. I liked it. I definitely liked it, but I wouldn't put it in the top 10. But this one part of it was absolutely my favorite thing. And so what we did was we hid an ARG in the game. If you don't know what an ARG is, it's usually something that has to do with the real world. It is much more secret, much more hidden. And we put a puzzle in Warmind with secret codes and ciphers and hidden pieces. We didn't advertise it at all. It was completely secret. And the public slowly found out about it. And so what the final piece was we actually went and I built 3 spears. Now in Destiny 2, one of the items you got in the game was this like cool spear. Well, we made a real one. It's made out of carbon steel. Like one of my hobbies is blacksmithing, and I partnered with one of my buddies who does 3D printing. And because it's Destiny, right, it's got to have like cybernetic stuff all over it. And so like I made like these giant carbon steel spears, plastic stuff on it, and we hid one up on a mountain. And so if you did the whole code right, you would get the coordinates to this mountain. Well, you kind of got to be careful where you hide stuff in this day and age. And I ended up getting a ticket because I hosted an event of greater than 20 people because there was people coming from all over the world to find this thing. And on top of it, not the first person found the spear, but I left a box of all of these coins. And so it would take a coin, you sign your name in the book. And surprisingly, nobody stole all the coins. Everyone was super honest. Everyone just took one.
Well, I'll go steal it if you give me the coordinates. I'll go.
Well, it's all gone now. But like that experience of like meeting fans and seeing them solve it together and like the whole community, like people like going up at 4 a.m., like talking, live streaming to their phone. Like that whole experience was like, I don't think I'd ever get that again. Like absolutely.
That's awesome.
Because we went and added a bunch of puzzles to Black Armory. In fact, like a significant amount more puzzles. And I love making puzzles and secrets, absolutely. But like that kind of just a true secret mystery that gets done. You don't really see that in games anymore, especially with the internet, right? Like everything gets spoiled like day one. So,
yep. All right. Who's your favorite daughter? No, I'm just kidding. What is your favorite movie? Your favorite movie?
So I prepared for this.
Okay.
I knew that one of you knows movies and the other one has no clue what movies are.
That's me. Shane does not.
So given that you are of comparable age, I'm going to show you something, and that should be your answer to what my favorite movie is.
Oh, crap. Now I'm on the spot. How did this happen? You're the one getting interviewed, not me. Oh, snap. Is that like a jetpack?
Let me give you the second hint. Any idea?
Rocketeer?
There you go. Very good.
Wow. Okay.
Well, yeah.
I got to admit, Jamie may have whispered in my ear. So our producer may have whispered.
Spoiler.
I know. I can't lie. I'm such a bad liar. Gosh, I could have just kept it to myself.
Well, volunteering the information is kind of the opposite of lying.
Yeah.
But no, it was like I love like diesel punk, like that kind of, not like steampunk. Don't get me wrong, I love steampunk, but I feel that a lot of steampunk is they just glue gears on it. I'm like, no, I want stuff to be clean and working, and that whole like superhero, but like, you know, Howard Hughes kind of era.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
The bad guys were Nazis. Like it's always good when you just blow up Nazis in a movie. So like,
yeah, I guess. I hope we don't get to a place where the good guys are. So
let's keep it. Yes, let's keep it in entertainment and not visit that again.
Yeah. So that's awesome. All right. So I'm glad not only were you able to answer the question with a great movie, you were able to show me props, and you were able to flip somehow the question onto me so that I got screwed. This was awesome. That was good. All right. Well, I just lost. That's all right. So my favorite movie, Braveheart. I don't know. It's the first in the line that I had seen of the Braveheart Gladiator. You know, that whole kind of genre, and gosh, Mel Gibson, just the whole thing, music, everything, the whole score. It was awesome. So Braveheart's my favorite. I haven't gotten to say that in a few weeks. I like that.
Yeah, my wife's favorite movie is Braveheart, and
your wife is right. You're wrong.
I know.
Okay.
Well, and so you're gonna hate me for this one. The first time I saw Braveheart, I fell asleep.
All right. You and Shane can talk movies. This is crazy.
No, I do like the movie. And I have since yet gone back and stayed awake for the whole time. But I'm like, listen.
We are old enough. You and I are old enough. When I bought the movie, it came on two VHS discs or tapes. So yes, it is a long movie, but it is awesome. It is worth the 3 hours.
It was, yeah.
So, well, Rob, thank you so much. I totally appreciate it. Everyone, please go connect with Rob on LinkedIn. Use him as a resource. Follow him. I'm sure he gives out some awesome advice too. I totally appreciate that you're kind of willing to be that, hey, let me spark you in the industry. For everyone else, subscribe to Next In, check in. You can ask us questions, comment on the YouTube feed and everything. But thank you again, Rob. This was awesome. And yes, your wife is right, and my wife is right, and we're both wrong. That's just how it's going to work. So everyone else, thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Next In.